When Myles Garrett gave up his own money, it didn't feel like a contract move, it felt like a warning. Because teams don't do this unless they see something coming. And whatever the Cleveland Browns are building around Shedeur Sanders, the league might not be ready for it. But what this move really means is where things get serious. Subscribe for daily NFL drama, breaking news, and viral sports moments you don't want to miss. It didn't come from a press conference, it didn't come from a headline-grabbing demand. It came quietly, and that's exactly why it hit so hard. When Myles Garrett agreed to restructure his contract with the Cleveland Browns, it immediately raised eyebrows across the league. Not because restructures are rare, but because of who was doing it and when. We're not talking about a role player trying to stay on a roster. We're talking about the reigning Defensive Player of the Year, a cornerstone, a player with leverage, status, and every reason to protect his own financial position. And yet, he chose to adjust his deal anyway. No public pressure, no reported tension, no contract dispute forcing his hand. That's what made this different. Because in the NFL, moves like this usually come with a backstory, negotiations, disagreements, or a team trying to create space out of necessity. But this felt intentional, calculated, almost like a message being sent without saying a word. And the timing only added more weight. The Browns are entering a critical phase. Questions surrounding their offense, uncertainty around the quarterback situation, and growing pressure to finally turn potential into results. This wasn't a team comfortably sitting at the top, it was a team trying to break through. So when your best player steps in and says, "I'll adjust my deal to help this team build," it changes the conversation instantly. Because now it's no longer just about front office decisions. It becomes about belief. Some fans saw it as leadership. Others saw it as a signal that something bigger is happening behind the scenes. And some even believe this is a direct vote of confidence in the direction Cleveland is heading, especially with the focus shifting toward a younger offensive core. But not everyone is convinced. There's another side to this, one that questions whether this move was necessary or even risky. Because anytime a franchise leans this heavily on future flexibility, it creates expectations. And expectations in the NFL don't stay quiet for long. Still, one thing is clear, this wasn't a routine adjustment. It was a move that forced people to stop and pay attention. Because when a player like Myles Garrett makes a decision like this, it doesn't just impact the salary cap. It changes the energy around the entire organization. But this wasn't really about the contract, it was about what he's betting on next. At first glance, it sounded simple, just another contract restructure. But once you actually look closer at what Myles Garrett agreed to, that's when you realize this wasn't small at all. Because in the NFL, money isn't just about how much you earn, it's about when you get it, how secure it is, and what risks you're willing to take. And Garrett changed all of that. Instead of keeping his original structure, which guaranteed earlier payouts and more immediate financial security, he allowed the Cleveland Browns to push key deadlines back. That might not sound dramatic on the surface, but in reality, it gives the team something extremely valuable: time and flexibility. Time to spend, time to adjust, time to build around their roster when it matters most. And in exchange, Garrett takes on more uncertainty. Not in a reckless way, but in a calculated one. Because when you delay money in the NFL, you're essentially trusting the organization. You're trusting that they'll still be in position to honor that structure later. You're trusting that injuries, performance, or roster changes won't suddenly shift the situation. That's a risk even for elite players. Now, to be clear, Garrett didn't walk away empty-handed. He still benefits from the new structure in certain ways. The deal isn't one-sided. But here, the key point most people are missing. He didn't have to do this. He wasn't forced into it. He wasn't backed into a corner. And he definitely didn't need to prove anything. That's what makes this move stand out. Because when a player at his level willingly gives the team more flexibility, it sends a message that goes beyond numbers. It says he's thinking bigger than just his own contract, bigger than just his own timeline. It says he's aligned with something. Some fans believe this is about chasing a championship window. Others think it's about setting a tone in the locker room, showing younger players what commitment really looks like. And then there are those who believe this is about something even more specific. A belief in what the Browns are about to build next. But that's where the conversation starts to shift. Because once you understand what Garrett gave up, the real question is, why did he do it? It's what does he see that others do? And that's where things start to get a lot more interesting. Because if this move was about belief, then who exactly is he betting on? Nobody saw this coming. A reigning Defensive Player of the Year just gave up control of his own money, not for headlines, not for pressure, but for a rookie quarterback most people aren't even sold on yet. And now, inside Cleveland, something bigger is quietly unfolding, something the rest of the NFL might be underestimating. This is where the story shifts and honestly, where things start to feel different. Because moves like this don't happen randomly. Players at the level of Myles Garrett don't wake up one day and decide to restructure millions unless there's a deeper belief behind it. And right now, all signs quietly point to one name, Shedeur Sanders. Think about the timing. Cleveland didn't make this move last year. They didn't do it when the roster had other needs. They did it now right as a young, unproven quarterback steps into the spotlight. That alone has raised eyebrows across the league. Some fans believe this is Garrett recognizing potential early, seeing something in Shedeur that hasn't fully shown up on Sundays yet. Others think it's less about Shedeur specifically and more about the organization finally aligning around a clear direction. Either way, the signal is loud. Cleveland is choosing a path. And that matters more than people realize. Because one of the biggest problems young quarterbacks face isn't talent, it's instability, constant changes, doubt, a lack of real support behind the scenes. But what Garrett just did flips that narrative completely. It tells the locker room and more importantly the front office that now is the time to commit. Reports claim Cleveland has been under pressure to figure out its long-term quarterback situation for years. Rumors suggest multiple internal debates, shifting plans, and hesitation. But this move, it doesn't feel like hesitation, it feels like a decision. And decisions create momentum. Now here, where it gets interesting. If a veteran like Garrett is willing to adjust his deal, it can influence everything, from how free agents view the team to how current players buy into the system. It creates a ripple effect that goes far beyond one contract. Suddenly, this isn't just about cap space, it's about belief. And for Shedeur Sanders, that changes the entire environment. Instead of walking into uncertainty, he's stepping into a situation where a franchise cornerstone has essentially backed the direction, publicly, financially, and strategically. But there's still a question hanging over all of this. Is this belief based on what Shedeur has already shown, or what the Browns hope he becomes? Because if it's the second option, then this move carries real risk, big expectations, bigger pressure, and a timeline that might be moving faster than anyone expected. And that's exactly why this moment feels so important. Because if Cleveland is right, this could be the start of something real. But if they're wrong, this decision might come back in ways nobody's ready for yet. And what happens next could either validate everything Garrett just did, or raise even bigger questions about who Cleveland is really building around. Not everyone is buying into this move the same way, and that's where the real tension starts to build. The moment news broke about Myles Garrett restructuring his contract, the reaction split almost instantly. On one side, you had analysts praising it as leadership, calling it rare, calling it selfless, calling it the kind of move that championship teams are built on. But on the other side, there was hesitation and in some cases, outright skepticism. Because not everyone sees this as a guaranteed win. Some analysts have quietly questioned the timing. Why now? Why commit flexibility before the roster is fully proven? There's a growing conversation around whether Cleveland is moving too fast, especially when the quarterback situation still isn't fully settled. And that's where things start to get uncomfortable. Because the debate isn't really about the contract, it's about belief. Some fans believe this is the front office and locker room finally aligning behind a vision. That for once, Cleveland isn't hesitating. They're picking a direction and going all in. And for a franchise that's dealt with uncertainty for years, that kind of commitment feels refreshing. But others aren't convinced. There's a segment of the fan base that sees this as risky, maybe even premature. Reports claim there are still questions about consistency on the offensive side of the ball. Rumors suggest that not everyone internally is 100% sold on how quickly this roster can turn into a true contender. And when you mix that uncertainty with a major financial adjustment like this, it naturally raises eyebrows. Then there's the media narrative, which has been shifting almost in real time. At first, the story was simple. Star player restructures contract to help the team. But now, the conversation is evolving into something deeper. Is this a calculated move or a gamble? Is this confidence or pressure being placed on a young core that hasn't proven itself yet? And that's where the noise gets louder. Because in today's NFL, perception matters almost as much as production. When a move like this happens, it sends a message, but that message can be interpreted in completely different ways depending on who's listening. Some see a leader stepping up. Others see expectations being forced into place. And the truth, it's probably somewhere in between. Because while this move does create opportunity, it also creates pressure on the front office to make the right additions, on the coaching staff to develop the system, and most importantly, on the quarterback to justify the belief being placed around him. And that's the part nobody can ignore. Because if the results don't come quickly, this exact move that's being praised today could become the same move people point back to and question. And if the pressure keeps building like this, it might not just test the roster, it could expose whether this belief was ever truly justified. While everyone is focused on Myles Garrett and the statement he just made, there's another name quietly sitting at the center of all this, and that's Andrew Berry. Because moves like this don't just happen on trust alone, they happen when there's confidence in the person pulling the strings behind the scenes. And that's exactly where this story takes another turn. Andrew Berry has built a reputation across the league as one of the smartest cap managers in football. Not flashy, not loud, but calculated, precise, always thinking 2 or 3 steps ahead, and this situation, it feels like a perfect example of that. Because what looks like a simple contract adjustment on the surface is actually something much deeper. By shifting timelines, adjusting bonus structures, and creating flexibility now instead of later, Berry has essentially opened a window. A window that gives Cleveland options, real options, at the exact moment they need them most. Free agency, trades, last-minute roster upgrades, moves that weren't possible before suddenly become available. And that's power. But here where it gets interesting. This only works if players buy in. You can design the smartest financial structure in the league, but if your star players don't trust the process, none of it matters. And the fact that Myles Garrett, a player with every reason to protect his own future, was willing to sit down and agree to this kind of adjustment. That says more about Berry than any statistic ever could. Some fans believe this shows a level of organizational trust that Cleveland hasn't had in years. That Berry has created an environment where players feel like they're part of something being built, not just managed. Others think it's simply good business, a smart player working with a smart front office to maximize timing and opportunity. Either way, the result is the same. Control. Because now, Berry isn't locked into one path, he doesn't have to force decisions in the draft, he doesn't have to overpay out of desperation. He can wait, he can pivot, he can strike when the opportunity is right. And in today's NFL, that flexibility is everything. But there's also a quiet pressure that comes with it. Because when you create this much room to operate, expectations follow. People start watching closer, every move gets analyzed, every decision gets questioned, because now there are no excuses. The resources are there. The structure is in place. The opportunity has been created. So the question shifts from can Cleveland make moves to will they make the right ones? And that's where Andrew Berry's true test begins. Because building flexibility is one thing. Turning it into results, that's something else entirely. And with this much control in his hands, what Berry does next might define not just this season, but the entire future of this roster. Everyone keeps talking about the cap space, the flexibility, the opportunity Cleveland just created. But there's one problem quietly sitting in the background that almost nobody is focusing on. The draft. Because for all the excitement around what Myles Garrett just unlocked, none of it guarantees Cleveland actually gets better. And that's where things start to get complicated. This year's draft isn't as clean as people think. There's no clear, can't-miss offensive superstar sitting at the top. No obvious plug-and-play weapon that instantly changes everything. In fact, reports claim this class is filled with uncertainty, especially at the exact positions Cleveland needs most. Wide receiver, question marks. Offensive line, talent but not without concerns. Quarterback depth, debated heavily across the league. And that creates a real dilemma. Because now Andrew Berry has to decide, do you trust the board or do you adjust your entire strategy? Some fans believe Cleveland should stay aggressive, take the best available talent and trust development. Others think this is the exact kind of draft where mistakes happen, where reaching for need instead of value can set a team back years. And that's where the pressure quietly builds. Because if the Browns miss here, it won't matter how much cap space they created. It won't matter what Garrett sacrificed. The opportunity will be there, but the results won't be. And here's the part that makes this even more interesting. This is where the restructure actually changes everything. Because now, Cleveland isn't forced into a decision. If the right player isn't there at their pick, they don't have to panic. They don't have to reach. They can trade back, accumulate more assets, or even shift their focus completely and address needs through a trade or late free agency move instead. That flexibility sounds like an advantage, and it is. But it also makes the margin for error smaller. Because when you have options, people expect you to choose correctly. And history shows that's not always easy. Some insiders believe this is one of the trickiest drafts in recent years, not because of lack of talent, but because of how unclear the top-end value really is. Teams are split. Evaluations are all over the place. And when that happens, front offices can either look like geniuses or completely miss. There's no middle ground. So now Cleveland is walking into one of the most unpredictable drafts in recent memory, with more flexibility than ever, but also more expectations than ever. And that combination, that's where things can either come together fast or fall apart just as quickly. And if Cleveland gets this draft decision wrong, everything Garrett just set up could start unraveling before the season even begins. This is where everything comes together, and where the pressure becomes impossible to ignore. Because what Myles Garrett just did wasn't just about helping the team in theory. It directly accelerates Cleveland's timeline. It sends a message that this isn't about waiting anymore, this is about winning now. And that changes everything for 2026. Suddenly, this season isn't just another step in development, it's a test. A real one, for the front office, for the coaching staff, and most importantly for Shedeur Sanders. Because when a player like Garrett restructures his deal, expectations don't stay the same, they rise. Some fans believe this is the moment Cleveland officially moved out of rebuilding mode, that the excuses are gone, that the team now has the resources, the leadership, and the direction to actually compete. Others aren't so sure. They think this might be the Browns putting pressure on a situation that still needs time. And that tension is exactly what makes this season so important. Because now, every move will be judged differently. Every game Shedeur plays, every decision Todd Monken makes, every roster move Andrew Berry executes, it all carries more weight, because the narrative has already started shifting. This isn't about potential anymore. It's about results. Reports claim the Browns internally believe they're closer than people think, that the roster isn't as far away as critics suggest. Rumors even hint that some within the organization see this as a legitimate window, not years down the line, but right now. But belief doesn't guarantee success. And that's where the real risk comes in. Because if Cleveland starts slow, if the offense struggles, if Shedeur takes time to adjust like most young quarterbacks do, the conversation is going to flip fast. The same move being praised today could suddenly be questioned. Was it too early? Was it too aggressive? Was the belief misplaced? That's how quickly things can change in the NFL. And for Garrett, that matters too. Because when you make a move like this, you're not just supporting the team, you're tying your legacy to what comes next. You're saying, I believe in this direction, and if it works, you're part of something special. But if it does, people remember that too. So now Cleveland enters 2026 with more than just talent or flexibility. They enter with expectations, real ones. The kind that define seasons and sometimes entire careers. And if Cleveland can't meet those expectations, this "win now" message might turn into the biggest question mark hanging over the entire franchise. There's one part of this story that almost nobody is saying out loud, but it's there. And it might be the most important piece of all. Because while this move looks like leadership, commitment, belief in the future, it also carries a quiet risk that could change everything if things go wrong. This entire decision is built on projection, not proof. Myles Garrett didn't restructure his deal because Cleveland already is a contender. He did it because they believe they can become one, and more specifically because they believe in the direction centered around Shedeur Sanders. But what if that belief is too early? What if the development takes longer than expected? What if the offense doesn't come together the way they're hoping? What if the pieces they add with this new flexibility don't actually move the needle? Because in the NFL, we've seen this before. Teams convince themselves they're close, make aggressive moves, and then reality hits harder than expected. Some fans believe this is Cleveland finally taking a bold step forward. Others think this could be the kind of gamble that looks great in the moment, but gets questioned later. And that's the tension. Because this move raises the ceiling, but it also raises the consequences. If it works, it changes everything. If it doesn't, it exposes everything. And if that belief turns out to be wrong, this move won't be remembered as leadership. It'll be remembered as the moment Cleveland bet on the wrong future. So when you step back and look at everything, this isn't just about a contract. It's about direction. Myles Garrett made a move that signals belief, real belief in where this franchise is headed. He didn't have to do it. He chose to, and that choice just raised the stakes for everyone inside that building. Now the pressure shifts. To the front office to make the right moves. To the coaching staff to build the right system. And to Shedeur Sanders to prove this belief wasn't misplaced. Because in the end, none of this matters without results. The flexibility is there, the opportunity is real, but the outcome, that's still unwritten. And that's the bigger question Cleveland now has to answer. Did they just take the first step towards something special? Or did they just commit to a vision that hasn't proven itself yet? Because the next move they make might decide everything.